yes, we can look to the south and say, oh my gosh, orange madness. So thank you so much for having me. I just want to say I'm really looking forward to giving this talk. I don't have any slides, it's really just me talking today. I really just wanted the opportunity to speak because there is something about speaking in a room where you naturally feel safe and inclusive. And that's because spaces like this are built on having the opportunity to have a sense of community. Even though we haven't met before, there's a shared feeling of belonging here. And we've all experienced that that is not always the case in our day-to-day lives. So it's really nice to have that opportunity to speak and to have people who naturally understand where you're coming from. I've lived in places where I have been in the majority, living in places like Nigeria or the Middle East where I was the majority in terms of race or in terms of religion for the early part of my life, and then kind of in my childhood, we moved to Northern Ontario. So as you can imagine, it was a bit of a shift. And that was one of those first few times that I became acutely aware that sometimes I was the only Black person in the room, I was the only Muslim in the room, or I was the only Black woman in the room, and you just layer on so much of that. And this was in my teen years, and for any of you who have teens or remember those teen times, it's the time when you actually want to disappear into the background. You don't really want to stand out a lot in your teen years. You just want to be with everybody else, but that's not the path I chose. And I think this really leads to who were those major motivators for myself, and it really was my parents. They always encouraged me to consider leadership opportunities, and they themselves emulated what they meant by leadership. They said to me, leadership is not the loudest voice in the room. They said it's also not about conforming and just going with the crowd. They said leadership is about speaking up when others are hesitating, when there's difficult decisions to be made, and sticking with overall keeping that you want to do the best for everyone. And that is actually what leadership means. And so my journey in medicine began like most of us. I really had this sense that I wanted to serve. I wanted to be able to be there, to have this deep commitment with compassion and to meld science, which I really loved, and that ability to change people's lives and to be involved with people. You get to really have very close relationships with people when you're in medicine. But you know what, even from my earliest days, I was aware that I stood out. But my parents also said to me, you know what, representation is important. And they reminded me I was privileged, and that was really important. I'm a second generation physician, I'm a first generation immigrant, but I'm also a strong Black woman, and I don't shy away from spaces. It also helps being the last of 5 children where you have to kind of speak up to be heard, starting at an early age. And when I went to university, my parents really said to me, connect with people in the community, whether it's at home or while you're in university. Speak to people who may not think that they have the same opportunities as you had, and who may not see the pathway that you're in. And it's true, for myself, going to university was never an option. In my Nigerian upbringing, it was more how many degrees you were going to earn. But there were some who, didn't think that maybe university was a good pathway or available to them. So this really kind of lent into me in terms of how do we look at leadership. And this is one of those times when you start to realize if you don't have the diversity in the leadership, these are where all the blind spots start to emerge. Because any of the underrepresented communities, their unique experiences, the adversities, they all kind of start to fall off if no one is going to talk about it. You have to introduce these ideas that not everybody has the same experience when you step out. I often say to people, people when they meet me or when they see my name, it's always different. I said it's different, your assumptions about me, depending what you do first. If you see me first, it's very obvious that I'm Black. But if you read my name first, you will have other assumptions about me. So we have to remember that it's important to have at the different leadership tables the understanding that people are walking through and having different experiences, despite having all the other factors be the same. And if you don't look at that or you don't acknowledge that, that becomes a huge issue. This was a big part for me when I worked on the Black Scientists Taskforce for vaccine equity, because yes, we knew that it was very important. We're seeing disproportionate deaths in the Black population with COVID. But to say, just go out there and say, you need this vaccine, without understanding that Black populations are very hesitant about large campaigns for treatments, not acknowledging what has happened in different populations before. And for us, all of us who've banded together in this task force, we went into it knowing we needed to talk about these difficult issues that have come up before. And we had to also use these opportunities as a sense of healing as well for our population, because we were going to embark on it knowing that we wanted to have the difficult conversations. And so we really need to think about that. But sometimes if that's not part of the conversation, then it gets lost in the messaging. And I have to say, a lot of times people are so excited to say being the first is so amazing, and it is. But at the same time, it can be lonely, right? I'm very proud to be the first Black woman president of the OMA, but my goal is to not be the last. And that is truly And for me, the visibility, the extra visibility, it really comes with pride. I know that I'm representing populations that are not generally seen in medicine, but also not seen in medical leadership. And so there's a sense of responsibility, and yes, there's a sense of pressure. And sometimes people say to me, do you ever have those voices saying to you, do you really feel like you belong? Or people ask me, do you have imposter syndrome? And I'm going to tell you the truth. The answer is no, I don't. And I don't have imposter syndrome. Why? Because I know that it took me much more work to get to where I am, by being a woman, by being Black, by being Muslim, at all the different intersectionalities, by being an immigrant, having a different vocabulary when I came in. So all of those, I know it was my sweat, blood, and tears that got me here, and I don't have any issues with that. I recognize that, so I don't. And I'm going to tell you my stance on imposter syndrome, because I think it's important for us all to talk about this. Because imposter syndrome is not an actual individual syndrome. That's the important thing I want you to remember. Imposter syndrome is actually a societal issue. And essentially, it's put in there as a structure because society is making you doubt yourself. It's making you question yourself. It's a societal issue, but your feelings are true and valid and real. But the issue is at the level of society. Because by having this and having you question yourself, this allows basically for the perpetuation of the patriarchy, gender pay gap, and general bias. So you don't have imposter syndrome, but how you feel and the results of the societal issues within imposter syndrome are real and it's truly valid. But I want you to kind of shake off that thought in terms of that you have a syndrome, because that implies there's an issue with you, but there's nothing wrong with you, but society does have an issue. One of the other things is over time, I've learned that there's moments where you still feel unseen or misunderstood. And this can either diminish you or define you. And this is what I really encourage you. I use it as fuel. I take these opportunities and it reminds me, okay, this is why it's important. This is why it's important to have that representation, to have that, because that's what's going to fuel the excellence, the persistence, and also the authenticity that we need to have when we're having conversations. And so I recognize that me in my role alone, my existence in this world is a threat to some, but for so many others, it's really a sign of resistance and a sign of power. And so I lean more into that. If you want to be threatened, go ahead. But you know what, I'm thinking about the other people who are seeing me and who are saying, I can be there too. I have space in the room. There's space for me. And that's what I lean into. And I think that's important because, you know, if we don't have any of this type at the top, then we know that this is where things break down. And I often think about this when I talk to, you know, not just medical students, but when I'm talking to high school students and grade school students, because we know a lot of this kind of discussions or these little things that trickle in, it starts really early, you know, so I really try to work on having those conversations. You know, yes, I'm in medicine, I love science, technology. Another passion of mine is math, which we could talk for ages about how we start to actually perpetuate that math is hard to girls way earlier, and it's actually quite disgusting. But it's something that is starting super early that you don't even think about. You know, I also hate when I walk through looking at Halloween costumes and the girls and boys ones. It just drives me nuts. It should just be costumes and whoever wants what, because those are all the changes already starting there. So we need to start thinking about this much earlier because the kids are watching and they're looking at us. They're looking at how we take up space. And so I never, you know, question about taking up space. And I think it's important because I tend to use a lot of this in terms of how I approach my life as a professional. And, you know, everyone's different with how they approach it. One of the things I do is I try not to diminish myself. So if anyone ever meets me in a professional context, if you're seeing me as a doctor, I'll be honest, I'm very formal in terms of naming. So if some people will say, oh, can I call you Zainab or Dr. Zainab? And I'll say no. I say it's Dr. / that last name, and so you can call me Dr. Abdurrahman, or you can call me Dr. A. It's Dr. A for allergy. That's also my Instagram, so those are the two. But I think it just kind of, it's important to use your names, use your titles. Don't be afraid to do that. If you have a title, please use it. Use it when you meet someone. And if someone says, oh, you know, this is Dr. John, blah, 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 and this is Zainab, I say, I'm Dr. Zainab Abdurrahman, and I am the president of the ONA. Or I am, you know, the clinical immunologist, I am. So don't be afraid to do that, and don't be afraid to correct people, because people will try to put you into smaller boxes, and I think it's important to use those languages and use the appropriate language. And when we talk about diversity, yes, diversity is actually the number of different people, but inclusion is actually the importance, because that's where the value of keeping the differences in the table. So how do we do this? How do we achieve this? Well, this is where we talk a lot, and you've heard about this today, where we talk about things like allyship, mentorship, and sponsorship. This is the importance here. And I'm encouraging each and every one of you to think, in certain times, you can be the ally. Sometimes you're the mentor, sometimes you're the sponsor. But when you're also looking for this, keep in mind that, A, sometimes these people do not look like you, and that's okay. Lean into them. They will also try to show you, sometimes by speaking about gender pay gap at the table, they will show you ways that they're trying to also be there. And for every group, I would say, you know, me in this role, it's not just for people who are Black, who are Muslim, who look at me. Anyone who's been othered in any way, they look at this compilation of so many different types of othering in my role and say, I could be there too. You know what? She's definitely not the standard, old white man who typically has inhabited this role. And so we can be allies for others. We can be the mentors too. So really look for community. And that's the other thing. You have your community, they're always with you. They may not be in the rooms with you because yes, sometimes we're the lonelies at the tables, but know your community's behind you. You know, they never leave you. They're cheering you on, whether they're miles, thousands of miles away, whether they're just down the street. They're always with you, so keep that in mind. Don't diminish yourself. Look for the allyship, mentorship, and be the allyship, mentorship, but also know your community is behind you, because that's how we survive, right? If you look through it all, we have a strong need for community. That's why we're here today. That's why it's I belong, you belong. It's about belonging. So you always have that, even if they're not right there with you, but feel that power and step into that power, because there are others who definitely will try to have you not feel that power. So I encourage you to just hold on to that. So with that, I really want to say, this is the time. You're here because you believe in this. We are the change makers. Yes, we can look to the south and say, oh my gosh, orange madness. Or you can also say, oh my gosh, the mayor of New York is orange madness. And that happened in so many other Democratic women were also moved in and displaced other people who had been perpetuating the patriarchy. So there is change. Even in the darkest times, there's change and there's movement because, as you saw earlier, people believe in this and we believe in it. And we are also the change makers. So when you step out of here, be the change makers. You already are by being in this room, so continue. We are a community, we're walking, and every time we can, all of us walk forward, we're making that road wider because those behind us are also coming in droves. So make space, take up space, and live in power. Thank you.